Today on Leaf by Leaf, An Adultery by Alexander Theroux. As a reminder, I'm reading all of Alexander Theroux's published work in chronological order, but saving Darconville's Cat for last. In Theroux's third novel, An Adultery, he rakes back the skin of the commodified allure of infidelity to expose the raw, unappealing flesh beneath. The titillation and intrigue that so deceptively lead down the path of adultery are subverted by the psychological torment, juvenile emotional vacillations, and an ultimate unmasking in which the two accomplices find themselves embroiled. Whereas Three Wogs was designed as a triptych, An Adultery's structure is modeled on Aristotle's conception of the syllogism. Thus, the first sentence of each of the book's three parts respectively mirrors Aristotle's major premise, minor premise, and conclusive deduction about Socrates' mortality. Theroux also prefaces the work with three epigrams, including one of his own invention, to give shape to a trajectory of a life that goes from being single to being in a couple to the triangle of an affair. We get the first-person perspective of Christian Ford, note those initials, CF, a highly educated painter who teaches at a private school in New Hampshire. In an art gallery, he sees a striking woman, Farrell, Colorado. Note the inversion or mirroring of Christian Ford's initials, and the play on the adjective feral, which is defined as in a wild state, especially after escape from captivity or domestication. And a 3.5-year affair ensues. Farrell is married to John, Colorado, whom we never meet and about whom our portrait proves unreliable. Christian is in an apparently lighthearted yet serious relationship with an impossibly young, impossibly beautiful, and impossibly naive girl named Marina Falieri. And though we get glimpses of Marina, it is Christian and Farrell about whom we learn for the bulk of the book through one of the most exhaustive works of psychoanalytic narrative I've ever read. Stephen Moore sums it up perfectly in his forthcoming book about Theroux when he says, Ford analyzes and catalogs her faults with a thoroughness not seen since Marcel trained his sights on Albertine. If you're new to Theroux, chances are high that the enigmatic Darconville's Cat was your entry point. But this is not Darconville's Cat, nor is this anything like his first novel, Three Wogs. It is, in fact, an interesting deviation from the redoubt of his brilliant 1975 essay, Theroux Metaphrasts, where he makes clear his stance on the type of literature he will produce, largely indebted to figures like Frederick Roth, whom Christian Ford quotes in this book. The trappings of earlier Theroux are here, but they are relegated to a conventional story told in a more commercial, though that's not to say popular, way. Think somewhere between Philip Roth, minus the dimension of Jewish identity, and Henry James, perhaps tending more toward James than Roth, perhaps even tending more toward James's brother William. One is tempting to propose that this came out of Theroux deciding to humor the literary establishment and defy pigeonholing. The anticipated, elegant, vigorous sentences informed by armloads of fusty lexicons are in this novel bridled by an eye more for clarity than complexity and aesthetic splendor. Yet these clear sentences engage with a topic of immense complexity, that of the psychological interplay between the sexes. Theroux seems not as intent on designing and constructing artifice so much as he is earnestly trying to figure something out, to present a rumination on one person's behavior this deeply and this widely seems born out of more than mere storytelling. What we get here is a sort of Burtonian anatomy of infidelity. The book is, in that sense, a mapping of what Christian Ford calls the rubrics of adultery. We readers get the written version of Ford's painting of the same name. Theroux, as incisive critic of all phenomena, is ever present through the voice of Christian Ford, and he turns his powers of sardonic opprobrium to the educational system, local artists, feminists, New Hampshire, physicians, pretty much everything. As with Three Wogs, he may be the best in the business at the art of unflattering physical descriptions, usually directed towards women. Though, to be fair, he typically describes women in terms of the physical, good or bad, and men in terms of the intellect or temperament. In one scene, Ford's ego comes into conflict, or perhaps competition, with the ego of Farrell's doctor in such a way that leaves Ford sputtering puerile insults about the doctor. Even when it seems rather unnecessary, Ford will describe flabby arms that look like they'd been made out of Neufchâtel. Again though, even as it stings, it entertains. But Ford is forthcoming about his own ego. He refers to himself a number of times as a narcissist, and often his analysis of Farrell will fold back over onto himself. Remember those initials. The essay on adultery lies right at the center of the book like an axis or a hinge. It's one of the most lucid and concise meditation on adultery that goes beyond the context of just marital fidelity to find a more universal maxim for adulteration. For these 4 pages, we step outside of the mind of Christian Ford and gaze into the past and ahead to the future of the narrative's timeline like a sort of Janus at the 0 point or origin. Adultery is the vice of equivocation, we are told right at the beginning. It is not a marriage, but a mockery of it. To connect with Ford's vocation as a painter, we get 2 colors are proven complementary only when forming that most desolate of colors, neutral gray. And then in a moment that is pure Theroux, we get the biting pronouncement that you become 2 cold copulars lapping frost off each other's rectitude. As the essayist continues scraping the flakes of glamour away from the canvas of adultery, we get the most glaring assessment of adultery's paradox. The adulterer is, by definition, the hunter of which he is also the game. I have to admit, the tedium of the narrative grew wearisome at times. The back and forth, on again, off again nature of the affair is offered in a realism that borders on the mundane, if it weren't for Ford's impressive depth of perception and a string of sharp aphorisms that run throughout the entire length of the book. Here is a selection. The artist is beyond anyone else one of those who tries to get a second chance in life. It was not education that made me a painter, but rather its opposite. My own sense of incompleteness, of being powerless, unshaped, and outside the currents of society. We prove what's missing by what we want. Our dreams are always our interpretations. Details are never small. The spirit that claims to be in awe of nature's marvels is often the spirit that tries to usurp them. Criticism is never the equivalent of a work of art. I hear you. Loud and clear. Envy grows from insignificant differences between people, not from overwhelming inequalities. If the worst and the best visions are true, I've often wished I'd known less of either to know more of what's between. One lives more by memory than by truth. The only thing an exception can possibly prove is that the rule is faulty. Myth, after all, is what we believe naturally. History is what we must painfully learn and struggle to remember. We all know the affair is doomed before we even read the first page. These 3-part tragedies never end well for anybody. And by the middle of the 3rd act, when Ford's spell is broken by the first wave of epiphanies, Theroux really begins to showcase his multi-layered talents as a writer. He assembles and connects the book's repository of psychological intro and extrospection to confer the cumulative diagnoses upon Christian and Farrell, while delivering real drama and evoking genuine emotion. After so much time spent with Christian and Farrell in the foreground, Theroux can now bring in secondary characters to intensify the impact of the deliveries. For all of Ford's years of analysis, virtually the entire book, it is not only a minor character, but one of the detestable trio of gallery women who knows more of the truth than he. Then, as a devastating coup de grace, the story reveals its innocent victim, depicted in a way that left me unexpectedly shaken. Nothing escapes Christian Ford's critical faculties. Farrell's speech, her body language, even the way she wipes herself, all are psychoanalyzed. An Adultery is certainly a departure from the Therouxian oeuvre thus far, but it is not without its merits.